Hello, and welcome to another episode of Mathison Talks, where we discuss tech and everything in between. My name is Mike Vega, and I'm actually joined with our very own CEO, Jacob Mathison. Hello, Jacob.
Hey, Mike. Happy to be here.
Thank you for having us. A quick note, we would love to hear your comments as we're always checking our Twitter and LinkedIn at Mathison Talks. This episode has been sponsored by Mathison Projects, Inc., a web development company. Today, we will be interviewing Aaron Sims on tech initiatives and the relationship between technology and democracy. Welcome, Mr. Sims, and thank you for being here.
Thank you, Mike. It's a pleasure to be here.
Thank you. So, let's just start. Can you tell us a bit about yourself and how you want to help the people in Nevada?
Well, sure. I appreciate the question. Well, currently, I am the Democratic nominee for State Senate for District 16, which is Nevada's Senate District 16, of course. I was born and raised in rural communities my entire life, so pretty much rural communities are what I know. I've had a long history now of being very much involved in our communities, as well as working with various nonprofit organizations, helping folks who are downtrodden or homeless, or folks get food and shelter and that sort of thing. I'm also been very involved in a lot of LGBTQ plus activism. If elected, I'd be the first ever openly gay state senator from Northern Nevada. So that's a little bit about some of my focus. I also have about several years now working in and around the finance industry, anything from accounting to auditing to managing small businesses. I've also been very involved in politics. I've worked as a non-paid citizen lobbyist a couple of times during a couple of legislative sessions here in the state. I've been an intern assistant for a governor, been vice chair of a local political party. I've been president or chair of several different political organizations, a campaign manager twice. So that's a little bit about my background.
Oh, okay. And so how long would you say you have been in politics?
Well, in terms of activism and political involvement, it's been nearly 20 years. And I'm not kidding when I say that. I started when I was a child.
Wow. And so you started as a child. Would you say it was like a passion for you?
Absolutely. Yeah. Politics being a passion, sure, in terms of understanding how not just the world works, but our country, our state, and our local municipalities. But I would also argue that really my passion began with civics. And I think that where that came from, when I was growing up, my father was a fire chief of the district that we grew up in. So I oftentimes would, tag along and go to different city council meetings or, fire board meetings, that sort of thing. And I kind of grew an appreciation for just the basic concept of the people electing representatives to vote and decide things on their behalf. One of the things I wanted, I remember I was like 7 years old. And one of the things I really wanted in the town that I was growing up in was a proper and adequate library. We didn't really have one. In fact, if we wanted to go to a library, we had to go to the next town over, which was a 25-mile drive. So I remember that in those days, my biggest passion, of course, I thought maybe I wanted to grow up and be an architect. So I would draw homes. That was my biggest thing, homes and then buildings and all sorts of things. And I got together with my best friend who at the time lived across the street. And I said, you know what, we need a library in this town. My dad just became, officially the fire chief. So why don't maybe we can try to convince him to get the mayor or the board to actually build a library. And maybe we can design it too. So we spent, hours and hours after school for days on end trying to come up with this library. And then, of course, my dad would get home from work and I would tug on his jacket like, hey, did you talk to the mayor yet? Hey, have you seen my designs? Hey, what's going on with this? So realistically, I go back to that moment where my interest in civics specifically started. And then at some point I realized, well, you got to take a side and you got to work for that side and you got to work to advance your causes. And that kind of started in around that time. It was just, it was interesting. I was one of those nerdy kids that very much cared about my community and my city more so than, playing Pokemon, collecting Pokemon cards and stuff, which I had a pretty phenomenal collection. I will say that. But that was my interest. Funny enough.
And so, this goes back to a very young age, which, I mean, even for myself, I can't say I was thinking about starting a library at my age. Like, that is amazing. Like, going that far back and carrying, and almost like seeing it for yourself, almost like as a duty. It's not right that we have to drive 25 minutes away, to actually go to a library, So, in the same vein, you mentioned that homes and the city as well was very important to you. So how do you feel about large corporations now, buying up a mass amount of houses only to just simply rent them out? Because we do have large corporations, that are taking pretty much blocks of homes and kind of, raising the value of the homes.
Right. And they're doing it. So at least what I've seen in my experience, especially here in the region that I live in, they're doing it so in such a manner where it artificially increases the prices to such a skyrocketed level. So to directly answer your question, I'm not a fan at all of these large investment corporations who come in to buy up, blocks at a time, forcing rents to skyrocket, forcing, folks who have lived there, not even, folks who have been there temporarily, right? Because a lot of people make the assumption that, well, if you're a renter, you're there temporarily and then you're going to move on to something else. A lot of times you're seeing cases where you have families. And in our situation, we have not just first gen Nevadans, but we're having second, third, and fourth generation Nevadans who are being boosted or bumped out of their homes because they can't afford these skyrocketing prices. And it's really off-kiltering a lot of things when it comes to our regional and local economies. So I'm not a huge fan of it at all. I will say that I understand why, you get to that, you get that certain person who, might have a second home and they choose to rent it out, for additional income, or they want to rent out a room or, another property they might own. That's one thing. But when you're having, these massive investors, these large corporations coming in, and they're quite literally removing folks from their homes that have been there for many years, it's not right. It's not something that I agree with. It's not something that I support.
There's even, the small retail investors that see it as a business plan to buy these homes up because of a very popular app where they can, people can book dates to kind of rent out the house for like 2 days. And, do you feel like there's sort of like a responsibility from tech companies to like eliminate their negative externalities?
I'm going to have to ask you to be a little bit more specific with that question.
If I want to be specific, it's Airbnb.
Yep.
A lot of small retail investors are buying up, homes as well. Now, what could a tech company do? Maybe kind of limit how many properties that somebody can rent out on their app? How would you see or mitigate this like incessant need to like take ownership of pretty much the housing market?
Right. And so, it's very interesting. That's a very interesting question because we are seeing that a lot, especially, in areas where they originally were supposed to be just vacation areas, right? Where you have these long-term destinations for folks, not just regionally, but also worldwide. And for where I live in the area that I'm trying to represent, I live by Lake Tahoe, which is an internationally known ski area. It's a beautiful lake. It's just gorgeous. And we have a lot of that issues, particularly in the district that I'm running to represent, when it comes specifically to apps like Airbnb and, others that are kind of similar. So I'm very familiar with this issue. And here's the thing. When it comes to what I feel the tech industry can do to at least mitigate that is, number one, there needs to be some sort of a partnership, right? Working with state and local municipalities. That's one thing that I think is very important. When you have large tech companies that come into different areas and they, maybe they're not familiar with, the folks who live at the local level or, the folks who are there have been there for a long time. It is kind of important to, to get to know the people. And it's important to not just be that that figure behind the screen, so to speak, but understand your region and understand your area. That's number one. Number two, by doing that, we would hope that there could be some kind of a partnership between like state and county municipalities when it comes to trying to mitigate what happens with those homes that, again, companies like Airbnb try to, allow folks to buy up and then, take ownership over time. That's one thing I'd really like to see is a better partnership between state and local municipalities and tech companies. I think that would be a lot better. Unfortunately, one of the things that and I say it's unfortunate because I know that a good portion of your audience is probably going to disagree with this, but one of the things I'd like to see done is a certain level of regulation that's going to have to exist when it comes to the tech industry getting a little bit too big for its britches, so to speak, and really just going overboard with Airbnb and overboard with buying up these homes. I think that's just it's too much. I don't unfortunately know how else the tech field directly can mitigate that problem. We can make suggestions, we can try to make incentives, but realistically, that's an issue that's going to have to be worked on, and they need to be willing to work on it with those local municipalities.
I don't know if I feel terribly comfortable with all of that. Being a business owner, one of the things that is always going to stress me out is the fact that a politician is thinking that technology is getting too big for its britches and that it needs to be interfered with. It's not that I'm blind to what other technology companies are doing to a number of these communities, but as an owner of a tech company, how can I ethically operate in a way that best serves the communities that I live in?
Yeah, sure. And I totally understand that concern. But here's the thing. Tech companies need to begin taking responsibility for their actions, first and foremost. So by doing that, by actually taking responsibility, there's a couple of ways that they could, better help their communities, or at least the areas that they're coming in. And that includes investing in those regional communities, right? And you can do that in a variety of different ways. You can invest in, local organizations that are helping to bring awareness to breast cancer, or to, fight against a certain disease, or maybe, feed those that are hungry on the streets, or those who are finding houses. They can give back in some way. Another thing that they could do, especially when it comes to these specific companies coming in and buying up these homes at such large rates, is maybe they can agree to have a roundtable with local housing and tenant leaders, local residents and local renters, mediated by a state or local municipality. I think that would be a phenomenal way for them to actually take responsibility for their actions. But either way, there needs to be a balance. We need to be able to have a system where you can have government and the tech industry work hand in hand for the betterment of the people. I think that would be something that we need to really aim for as a goal, especially as we go further and further into the future.
That's actually a great solution there. I want to shift gears here in regards to inflation. So we actually did an episode on Cathie Wood. She's a well-known investor.
Yes.
She recently sent a letter to the Fed to stop raising interest rates. So how do you feel about the Fed taking drastic steps, such as raising interest rates to reduce inflation? But at the same time, what about the impact this has on the housing crisis?
So, unfortunately, when it comes to inflation, which of course is not just a national problem, but it's a worldwide problem right now, the Fed, or the Federal Reserve Bank, that's kind of all they're limited to doing, if you think about it. They're trying to off-kilter and offset the rising amount of inflation because too many people are either going out and trying to buy something, or whatever the case might be. And so the only way they can offset it is by raising those interest rates. So I totally understand why she would suggest maybe easing up on the raising of interest rates to try to slow down folks purchasing things. But realistically, that's kind of the only answer that the Fed would have at this time, because that's all they've done in the past, and that's how they do. That's how they balance things out. Now, I am very concerned that that's going to be yet another added layer of cost that are driving up and skyrocketing our housing costs and whatnot.
Shifting gears here, how do you feel about alternative renewable energy? Particularly wind turbines, because like it's been in the news lately. Because there are people out there who say that wind turbines, they spew fumes, they're noisy, they kill birds, and after 10 years they break down. How do you feel about alternative energy?
So I am a strong proponent of alternative sources of energy. Where I live here in Nevada, in fact, Nevada as a whole, we are arguably the windiest and sunniest state in the country. So when it comes to both wind and solar, I mean, hey, there's no better market than Nevada, let me tell you. But no, I'm a strong proponent of it, and I understand a lot of the concerns that folks have when it comes to wind turbines specifically. As a kid, where I was growing up was actually in the Central Valley near the Tracy Hills, and we had tons and tons of wind turbines. Back then in the 90s. So I'm familiar with a lot of those concerns, but the idea there is, as we again go forward in time, there's better technology, new technology that comes out that could, replace some of those older wind turbines and, update them and turn them into something that's a little bit more efficient, that also provides a bit more electricity for folks, that's still cleaner than the alternative, of course, of, using oil and coal and everything else is causing a lot of damage to our environment. So, I'm a strong proponent of wind and solar, both. And again, it's all about kind of refining the industry as we go. But the only way we can refine that industry is if we continue to actually invest in it and turn it into a stronger alternative than what we currently have today.
Understood. And shifting gears, how do you feel about the current health system in America? Would you prefer to have a state-owned healthcare system similar to California's?
So I think that no matter what, we are kind of on our way there. And let me explain what I mean by that. Over the past several years, the concept of having, Medicare for all or healthcare for all has become such an important and yet popularized concept, because a lot of folks are seeing that you have other first world nations that are able to have that kind of a single payer system, and yet they still have a balance, and they're able to balance that out with a, maybe a privatized option. So I think that no matter what, we're kind of on the way there. How the United States chooses to go about it, that's a whole different ballgame. But I do think that it would be a prudent and positive course to offer, at least, as a next step, a solid single payer option. Give folks the option if they want to choose that option, and then also maintain it, a little bit when it comes to balancing it out with having a privatized option. Because I know a lot of folks also, for whatever reason, they want to stay with their health insurance and all that. And I understand that. But I think we should consider transitioning towards that as we go into the future, because ultimately that's where everybody else is going to want to be at.
I do have some concerns, especially if we were to move to a model in this country to state-controlled healthcare. And really the reason comes down to the fact that I've worked with a number of healthcare related clients, and a lot of the issues and difficulties of working with these clients is there are so many regulatory barriers that so many people have to be mindful of, and it becomes a minefield for anyone to do anything. And it seems to entrench some of the bigger players, sometimes seeming to stifle innovation into new medical technology. Do you feel that if the United States was to control all of this, these regulatory barriers would be more diminished and more effort would be made to improve our existing system?
Well, here's the thing about that. You have to remember where initially regulations and regulatory layers of bureaucracy come from. And they come from the idea or the concept of actually protecting consumers or those folks who are utilizing that insurance from, anything from fraud and malpractice to, or I guess malpractice would be for doctors, but, protecting them from, a whole variety of different things that might lack in their own health insurance. So those regulations are meant to actually protect the people. But when it comes to, regulating innovation, again, as we go forward in the future in our society, there should be a way to mitigate how many regulations exist when it comes to, providing alternatives here or alternatives there, while still protecting, the insured, while still protecting those who need access to good quality healthcare. Because otherwise, what's the point? What's the point in having any kind of healthcare system if it's not serving its purpose, which is providing excellent care for the people?
So the water crisis is becoming concerning. Particularly with the draining of Lake Mead, it has sprouted a lot of conspiracy theories on streaming platforms. Could you provide some insight as to why Lake Mead has seen such a reduction in the water in the past years?
Yeah, sure. Well, there's a lot of reasons why Lake Mead has been drying up. Number one, our average annual rainfall, not just in Nevada, but also, as you know, Lake Mead is fed by the Colorado River. It has been quite reduced over the past several years compared to what it used to be previously. Now, when I'm saying that as in terms of consistency, right? All of our watersheds, all of our rivers, all of our lakes, they rely on having a consistent annual rainfall, excuse me. That's a big part of it. Another big part of it is Lake Mead does provide water or access to water for a couple of different metropolises. Obviously, the primary one being LA. LA has used quite a bit, and as they continue to expand in LA, they're using a bit more and more with their water. Lake Mead also feeds a little bit into Las Vegas and a little bit into parts of Arizona. So a lot of that depletion that we're seeing, it's a mixture of climate change, annual rainfall, having drier and hotter summers, as well as, again, an expanding population in these different metropolitan areas. So you're kind of seeing the culmination of a few bad scenarios happening all at once.
Oh, that's interesting. One fact that I actually came across that was actually super interesting, because a lot of people think, oh, it's Las Vegas. Well, Las Vegas actually, from what I understand, isn't taking too much of a percentage of that water. They actually took steps to mitigate that.
They did, yeah. And we worked hard to mitigate that because, obviously Lake Mead is right there in our backyard. So it's, Lake Mead's also something, believe it or not, as much as we all understand what its purpose is, it's something that we enjoy. It's very much a treasure for the people of Nevada and the people of Arizona, because it's right there on the border. But it's also a national treasure in many ways. You have the Hoover Dam there. People love going and traveling to Lake Mead and enjoying the water, being on the boats, being out there and even swimming in the water and stuff. So it's very much a treasure, more so than just having to be a water supply or a mainstay water supply for different areas. We in Nevada very much treasure Lake Mead. And so it's, I think in many ways, we were a little bit too late in terms of acting on the depletion of Lake Mead. We knew that it was, beginning to go under the water levels a number of years ago, where it should be. But sometimes it also takes time to, study and focus and see, is this going to be an ongoing trend? Is this something that's going to last a little bit longer than just a couple seasons of a drought? So I still feel that we could have acted a little bit sooner. Actually, we could have acted a lot sooner. But we care about Lake Mead, so it was vital for not just Las Vegas, but also Clark County and the state of Nevada to intercede and ensure that we can protect what's left of it, and then find a way to work with various states to maybe divert some water there and kind of bring it back up.
Well, I hope we start seeing some more rainfall. We definitely need it. How do you feel about marijuana reform? You have apps like Weed Maps that offer a cannabis delivery service now. We're also seeing a shift culturally as our president just announced a release by pardon for those in jail for possessing or using marijuana. Additionally, the White House is calling for the Attorney General to review the schedule for marijuana and possibly reduce it to a less severe classification.
Well, my only question is, what in the world took the federal government so long? But I mean, look, and I already know the answers to that question. That's a very long and extensive question. But here's the thing, I'm proud to say that in 2016 I voted in favor of legalizing cannabis statewide, and our state definitely passed that for recreational purposes. We've had it as a health alternative since the 1990s, believe it or not. It's just been heavily regulated here. So I'm a strong proponent of cannabis reform. I'm one of those that I believe that personally that use of cannabis is not an issue. It's far less dangerous than smoking cigarettes or drinking alcohol or anything else that's considered legal. There's also some benefits that come to it as an alternative for folks who want to use it as a medicinal purposes. But specifically when it comes to criminal justice reform, I'd like to see full legalization for it because of some of the systemic problems that have come from, folks being arrested just for not just using marijuana, but having too much marijuana on them, whatever the case may be. And a lot of times you'll see a higher percentage of people of color, Black and brown folks who are arrested and put into our prisons who are not given the same fair treatment as other folks who might be able to avoid that, even based on marijuana use. And part of that has to do with, again, a disparity when it comes to how much money they have for cash bail, for example. So anyway, I'm starting to go on a tangent, but there's that small, what some folks might think is a small act is a step in the right direction that would actually lead to a snowball in a positive direction, where we see a lot of folks who were arrested or had their entire lives literally destroyed simply because of a cannabis charge. And so, I'm a strong proponent of heavy reform when it comes to cannabis. And I'd like to see us move further into a direction where that isn't an issue. Plus, of course, we can look at the drug trade. That's been an issue when it comes to the drug war. And, going back up to the federal government, that's been something that has been a problem for us for the past, 5 or 6 decades. So it's definitely something that I'd like to see reformed. It's something I'd like to see corrected, not just for the people, but also for the system itself.
Well, I want to thank you so much for coming onto our platform and providing insight to these hot topic issues. Is there any closing comments that you'd love to give, and also where people could kind of check you out and find your socials, your website?
Sure. Well, again, I very much appreciate being on your podcast, Mike. And thank you, Jacob, of course, for joining. Folks who are interested in my campaign or me as a person or as a candidate can visit my website at simsfornevada.com. And of course, you spell that all out in the words. There's no numbers there. You can also follow me on social media. I'm available on TikTok, on Facebook, on Instagram, as well as Twitter. And my handle or @ is Sims for Nevada as well. So again, thank you so very much for allowing me to come on your program.
Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for coming on with us.
This has been another episode of Mathison Talks. If you have any feedback, suggestions, or just want to comment on the subject, be sure to check out our Twitter at Mathison Talks. And please don't forget to share. We greatly appreciate it. That's how we get the word out. And thank you for joining us.